The scheduled tourists of the third all-union route through the Western Caucasus, who had started their journey from Guzeripl village, were not able to overcome it. They, struck by the elements on September 10, 1975, were left lying on the snow. Many years have passed, but this tragedy has not yet disappeared from people's memory. Many people still don't understand how people could freeze to death in the forest by the fire in the summertime. In those years only 2 or 3 newspapers wrote about what had happened, without a detailed analysis of the mistakes made by the organizers of tourism, without analyzing the actions of the victims. The Adygean Regional People's Court held a trial. Only the administrators of Gornaya and Kavkaz tourist camps and some officials from higher organizations were held accountable for what happened in court. In the Soviet years, tourism was probably the best idea for improving the nation's health and broadening its horizons. The cheap vouchers to the mountains were sold out almost overnight. Boys and girls of all ages and their guitars and tents were leaving for various parts of the country, but no one could imagine that on the favorite route through the mountains to the sea dozens of people could be killed overnight. The 1975 tragedy on the all-union hiking route number 30 was like a bomb out of the blue. Even children were able to cope with a simple trekking route along the trails that have been walked since the mid-1930s. However, in September of the ill-fated year, only half of the 50 tourists survived. The public was not so much shocked by the deaths of very young people as by the unpleasant circumstances of the accident. The fullest picture became known thanks to the stories of Ivan Vasilyevich Bormatov, the man who as the head of the rescue team personally took part in rescue work on the route. The chapter Mistake of the Instructor from his book In the Mountains of Adygy has become a kind of chronicle of those tragic events and received within the framework of the project Backpacking Blogger from Ivan Vasilyevich new details allowed to look at the situation more widely. So what happened? On the 9th of September a planned group of 50 travelers set out on the key part of the route had seemed to be under the spell of an evil fate. Trouble began with the departure of the main instructor of the 3 groups Alexei Ajiv. As a teacher, he was returning to school for the new school year, leaving his charges to 2 assistants, students Alexei Safonov and Olga Kovaleva. This is a problem we constantly faced, Ivan Vasilyevich explains. There was always a shortage of instructors. There were times when one instructor led 4 groups on a training trip. The problem was especially acute at the end of the season, in September. The students were all quitting, and the local instructors just weren't there. Some instructors only came to work for 1 lap. A lap is one group's driving to the sea and returning to the head base. Sometimes the circle of instructors on the camp reached up to 300 people for a season. And still there was not enough of them. This is mostly a young and seasonal profession. Having divided almost 50 persons among themselves into 2 subgroups, Olga and Alexei set out on a new variant of the route, offered the same year, Guzeripl, valley of the river Belaya, Teplyak shelter, east alpine slope of Guzeripl mountain. At the place of the first night's stay, out of a habit picked up during their stay at the tourist camps, the hikers immediately broke their regimen, deciding to have a theatrical evening with performances and songs until midnight. A late curfew did not facilitate an early rise, and in the morning the sky was already covered with heavy clouds, drizzling with a light rain. Losing precious hours to pack, the group continued on the route, stretching in a long chain along the eastern slopes of Guzeripl mountain. No one paid any attention to the whitened slopes of Kamenoye Moor Ridge, Oshton mountain and the tops of Guzeripl. No one listened to the smell of snow in the air, a sure sign of the approaching hurricane. In the meantime, gusts of wind increased, the rain was replaced by snowdrift, visibility deteriorated sharply. Olga and Alexei tried to assemble the tourists, and the longer they waited, the worse it became to see the laggards. They were nervous and began to consult with the group about what to do next, to return to the Teplyak shelter or to make their way along the trail to the fished shelter. The uncertainty of the young instructors immediately passed on to the other participants. Long discussions led to the inevitable, opinions were divided. The blizzard provoked the hikers to argue in high tones. In the group there were alternative leaders whose determination drew to their side their panic-stricken comrades. While some were trying to persuade the others to turn back, others were already silently heading in the direction they knew only. The fresh trail, which was not even a year old, was quickly covered with snow. In the Soviet period, the people who planned and developed tourist routes in the mountains were not fools or idiots, they were very competent and trained professionals and calculated all options. However, the section of the route where the group was killed was put into operation only in 1975 by the director of the tourist center Kavkaz. Therefore this section was not prepared for the passage of scheduled tourist groups. There were no appropriate height markings and emergency options for getting off the trail in case of bad weather. The rescuer explains the fatal error of the hikers who fell off the trail. In vain, Olga and Alexei urged the stubborn leaders to go back because they had already disappeared behind the curtain of the snow and carried more than half of the group. Given their trivial instincts, the unsupervised hikers believed that the forest ahead would protect them from the wind, that they could always make a fire from the branches, and that in the company of strong and determined guys who would surely have served and have the necessary skills, their chances of survival would increase considerably. But they did not consider the fact that the newly minted leaders were only defending their own interests and were not going to help anyone. In the blind confusion, people lost sight of each other, freezing. They began to desperately call for help, thrashing and getting stuck in the snow, losing their minds in terror and despair. Losing their way, many slid down the slope, plummeted down ledges, and fell into gullies. Alexei rushed forward to gather the distraught group, while Olga led the others back toward the shepherd's hut. Barely discerning the path, in spite of the face and eyes splashing snow, practically blinded, she still led her people to the shepherd's booth. Alexei, on the other hand, reached the edge of the forest with a handful of the group, built a fire, and told the rest of the group to watch the fire while he himself searched for survivors. If I were to single out the main reasons that led to the irreparable consequences, the first is that the group went with inexperienced and unprofessional guides, instructors of the campground. The second reason, even though these inexperienced instructors had no authority with the group, yet they made the right decision when the weather worsened to return back along the path already traveled. The main wrong step of that group of tourists was disobeying the instructor's order and leaving the trail in the direction of the forest on their own. Those who did not disobey the instructor's order and did not leave the trail and followed the instructor survived. The main reason of all troubles is that the group broke up. If in the mountains, the group breaks up, it is almost a regularity of all accidents in the mountains occurred with tourists, concludes Ivan. And what about the leaders? They reached the saving borders of the forest, made a fire, and silently took out a can of stewed meat. They did not hurry to save the straggling friends and freezing girls. Soon the shouts in the distance were replaced by pathetic groans and then died out altogether. The example of the 1975 tragedy in many respects was revealing, exposing pain points of safety in the mountains. Having made a number of serious mistakes, the participants of the route have again and again put their lives and the lives of their comrades in danger. Negligence at the start of the route, ignorance of the terrain and weather conditions, disunity of the group, uncertainty of the leader, unseasonable outfit, all these are components of the tragedy. As, however, the lack of qualified instructors on a permanent basis, uninterrupted communication and interaction of persons providing the operation of the route, as well as regular monitoring of hiking trails for marking, parking lots, water sources, etc. However, such a mass tragedy on this route is not the first, notes IV Bormatov. Sadly, I was told by the oldest employee of the tourist center, Ivan Fedorovich Maratsa, that such a tragedy of mass death has already been somewhere in the early 1960s. In my memory, on this route a group of Moscow speleologists died in the 1980s and a group from the town of Tuops in 1986. And still, it would be desirable to add that tragically known group of 1975 was not the unique group on the route, appeared in clutches of bad weather, in many respects thanks to professional experience, personal courage and authority of instructors. Other groups have rallied and have got safely to a safe shelter. This once again confirms the fact that even in the harshest conditions the human factor is decisive. Where does safety in the mountains begin? With a picture in the manual, or with the personal responsibility of the tourist for himself and his team? From common sense, from trusting your own feeling, or from following the leader's orders? From the knowledge of how to act in case of trouble, or from the ability to prevent it? We can argue until the heated argument, but one thing is unalterable: the mountains, which do not forgive mistakes. The inexperienced instructors of the 93rd group were not officials, so they were not criminally liable. Finding themselves in an extreme situation, Alexei Safonov and Olga Kovaleva did everything in their power to save people. There were no fatalities among those who did not break away from the group and stayed with the instructors. The section through the Teplyak shelter was closed immediately after the tragedy. The Thirdism thing did not lose its popularity even after the accident, but the groups followed an old, tried and true path. During the years of the existence of Route 30, more than 200,000 people took the route. In the 1981 film Storm Warning, based on the tragedy, the authors decided to soften the situation. Only 2 people died, and the exasperation in the struggle for survival did not look as monstrous as it was in reality. But the mountains remember the truth. If you were interested, thank the author by putting a like. And also do not forget to subscribe so as not to miss the outputs of even more interesting videos of my channel. Turn on notifications by clicking on the bell and share this video with your friends. What else interesting can you add to this video? Write in the comments, it will be interesting to read.